The hearing room was silent, every eye fixed on the table where Melania Trump sat, composed but visibly tense. Then, with a voice sharp enough to slice through the quiet, Representative Jasmine Crockett leaned forward and said, "The American people deserve the truth, and no title, no name, no legacy can hide it anymore. Mrs. Trump, you have hidden behind silence for too long, but today silence will not protect you." The words landed like a thunderclap. Gasps rippled through the crowd, reporters' pens froze in midair, and cameras zoomed in for every possible angle. Crockett did not stop. She raised her voice, her tone unflinching. "You knew about the DNA scandal before the public ever did. You knew the truth before it was leaked. And yet you stood by as lies were fed to the American people. That stops today." The audience erupted in murmurs, some in disbelief, others in applause. It was not just an accusation, it was a declaration of war. Melania's eyes narrowed, but she remained silent, gripping the edges of the table as Crockett pressed on. "You can try to present yourself as the graceful bystander, but today, Mrs. Trump, you are not a bystander. You are the central figure in a cover-up that has shaken this nation." The moment was electric. What began as a formal hearing had turned into a battlefield, and Jasmine Crockett had just fired the first shot. The hearing was not just another session lost in political noise. It had drawn one of the largest live audiences Congress had seen in years. Every major news network carried it live, millions of Americans watching from their living rooms, and every seat in the chamber was packed. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation, like the nation was holding its breath, waiting for history to unfold. At the center of the storm sat Melania Trump, dressed in her usual elegance but with an expression that betrayed the weight pressing down on her. She was not a politician, not an elected figure, yet her presence carried the gravity of someone who had long been shielded from scrutiny. For years she had been seen as silent, detached, almost untouchable. But now she was in the spotlight, cornered by revelations she could no longer ignore. On the other side of the table was Representative Jasmine Crockett, a figure already feared by opponents for her razor-sharp questioning and unflinching boldness. Today she carried herself not as a participant, but as a force determined to peel away every layer of secrecy that surrounded the Trump family. She knew the weight of the moment, and she wielded it like a weapon. Around them, a panel of lawmakers shifted uneasily. Some Republicans tried to mask their discomfort, whispering to aides, their faces pale as they realized the depth of what was about to be exposed. Democrats leaned forward, sensing an opportunity, their eyes locked on Crockett as if they were watching a fighter step into the ring. The press gallery was a frenzy of activity. Reporters typed furiously. Photographers snapped every flicker of emotion across Melania's face, and commentators prepared their sound bites that would flood the airwaves within minutes. The audience was not silent observers either. Citizens who had been allowed into the hearing room gasped, murmured, and even clapped when Crockett's words struck hardest. The hearing had become more than testimony. It was theater, a public confrontation where every word carried the weight of truth or deceit. This was no longer just about Barron Trump's DNA scandal. It was about power, influence, and the question of whether the Trump dynasty could still control the narrative when the facts were laid bare for the world to see. And at the heart of it stood two women, Melania Trump, fighting to protect her family, and Jasmine Crockett, determined to expose what she believed was a carefully constructed facade. The stage was set, the clash was inevitable, and the country was ready to erupt. Crockett leaned into the microphone, her voice steady but burning with intensity. "Let's stop pretending this is about privacy. This is about deception. The American people were misled, and you, Mrs. Trump, were part of it." The room crackled with energy as her words cut across the silence. She held up a folder, its pages thick with documents, each one representing leaked evidence, statements, and timelines that painted a darker picture than anyone had anticipated. For months, questions swirled. Who knew what and when? The truth is simple. Your family knew. You knew. And yet you chose to let a lie grow until it exploded into the public sphere. Melania finally spoke, her accent sharp with fury. "This is an attack. A cruel attack on me, on my son, on my family. These are lies meant to humiliate us. Her voice, once measured, broke into fragments of anger. But Crockett was unrelenting. Lies? Mrs. Trump, it was not the public who leaked those results. It was not the media who fabricated the science. The DNA evidence is undeniable. And your refusal to confront it head-on shows not dignity, but fear. Fear of the truth and fear of what it reveals about the empire built around your family. The gallery gasped. Some clapped. Others shook their heads in disbelief. Melania's fists clenched on the table, her calm mask slipping as Crockett pressed harder. You stood by while statements were drafted to twist the facts. You allowed spokespeople to frame this as slander when you knew the results were real, and you thought the American people would never find out. But today, they are watching. And they are listening. Melania tried to cut in, her voice trembling with both rage and resolve. You are exploiting my child. A minor, my son, being dragged into political games. Shame on you! But Crockett's retort landed like a hammer. Shame on those who thought they could bury the truth beneath privilege and power. This is not about a child. This is about a system of secrecy. This is about manipulation. And this is about accountability. Every word turned the hearing into a spectacle of raw confrontation. The clash was no longer polite, no longer restrained. It was a duel between accusation and defense, between exposure and denial, each sentence louder than the last. Commentators in the press box whispered urgently to each other, "This is history unfolding live. We've never seen a First Lady pressed like this, not in modern memory." Crockett pushed the folder across the table, its pages sliding toward Melania with finality. The evidence is here. You can deny it to me, you can deny it to Congress, but you cannot deny it to America. Because the truth is already out. The words echoed in the chamber, each syllable fanning the flames of a scandal that now seemed unstoppable. The chamber felt like it was vibrating. Every reporter, every citizen in the gallery, every lawmaker on the panel could sense the tension about to snap. Crockett held up a single page from the folder, the page everyone had been waiting for. Her voice carried like a bell, cutting through the murmurs. This document is not speculation. It is not rumor. It is confirmation. Confirmation that the Trump family was briefed on the DNA findings weeks before they were leaked. And here, in writing, is proof that attempts were made to discredit the lab itself, to bury the results. The room exploded. Gasps, shouts, even applause burst out as the weight of her words hit. Cameramen scrambled, flashes lit the chamber, and commentators whispered frantically into their phones, already drafting headlines that would dominate the news cycle for days. Melania's face hardened. She stood, her voice trembling with fury. This is outrageous. You twist documents, you twist truth, and you exploit a child's life for your theater. I will not sit here and let you disgrace me, my son, or my family. But Crockett cut her off with a phrase that detonated like dynamite. Mrs. Trump, the disgrace does not come from exposure. The disgrace comes from the lie. The audience erupted, some clapping, others booing, but the energy was uncontrollable. The chairman's gavel pounded for order, but it was drowned out by the roar of the crowd. Crockett leaned forward, her voice unwavering despite the chaos. You could have chosen honesty. You could have stood before the people and said the truth, painful as it may be. But instead, you chose silence. You chose cover-up. And now you face the consequences. America deserves transparency, not shadows. The crowd shouted, "Yes!" Applause thundered through the chamber, drowning out the gavel again. Even some lawmakers who had sat stiff and silent now exchanged glances of shock, realizing the ground beneath them had shifted. Melania, her composure shattered, tried once more to regain control. This is not justice. This is a witch hunt, she cried, echoing the familiar words of her husband. But the chamber was no longer hers to command. Crockett struck the final blow of the moment. Call it what you want. The truth does not disappear because you don't like it. The truth stands, and today it stands against you. The audience erupted again, half in cheers, half in outrage, but no one could deny what had just happened. The First Lady had been cornered, her defenses crumbling in the face of undeniable evidence. The climax was not just Crockett's revelation, but the sight of Melania Trump, usually untouchable, standing in the harshest light she had ever faced. The chamber had turned into a theater of shock, a stage for truth colliding with power. And for the first time in years, the Trump name looked less like an empire and more like a crumbling wall. The room still thundered with shouts when the chairman's gavel struck again and again, trying to restore order. But the echoes of Crockett's words were louder than any attempt at silence. When the uproar finally dimmed to a tense murmur, Crockett leaned into her microphone one last time. Her tone was quieter now, but it carried the weight of finality. America has watched this family hide behind walls of wealth and silence. America has watched lies polished into speeches and whispered into cameras as if they were truth. But today proves something larger than a DNA result. It proves that no dynasty, no name, and no legacy is above accountability. The audience fell silent. Even those who moments earlier shouted in anger now leaned in, compelled by the gravity of her closing words. Crockett turned her gaze directly to Melania, her voice unwavering. You can call this an attack. You can call it political theater, but the reality is simple. The truth has spoken, and it has spoken louder than any denial. It cannot be erased. It cannot be hidden. And the people will remember who tried to bury it and who dared to reveal it. Melania sat down slowly, her expression a mix of anger and exhaustion, the spotlight no longer something she could command, but something that exposed her every reaction. The cameras captured it all, her silence, her clenched jaw, the moment where defiance met defeat. Crockett faced the chamber, addressing not just the lawmakers, but the millions watching across the nation. This is not about partisanship. This is not about revenge. This is about truth. And if America is to move forward, truth must never again be treated as the enemy, no matter how powerful the person standing in its way. The chamber erupted one final time, not in chaos, but in thunderous applause that seemed to shake the very walls. Commentators whispered, "This will be remembered for years," while social media exploded with clips that spread like wildfire across the globe. For many, the moment was clear. Melania Trump had been exposed, and no denial could erase the impact. For others, it was a rallying cry, proof that the fight over truth and power was far from finished. But no one could deny that something irreversible had happened. The camera zoomed in on Crockett as she delivered the closing line that would dominate headlines. You can hide behind silence, but you cannot silence the truth. Not today, not ever. The gavel struck one last time, but the hearing was already etched into history. What had begun as a hearing had ended as a defining clash of power and exposure, leaving America to grapple with the meaning of what it had just witnessed.